South Africa just sent a message to the entire world and Mexico was the first to feel it. What happened between these two nations has geopolitical analysts scrambling, economists rethinking their models, and Pan-Africanists across the continent standing up and taking notice. This is not just a story about two countries. This is a story about Africa's place in the emerging world order. Here is what we are covering today. South Africa and Mexico, two of the most powerful emerging market economies in the world, are now locked in a defining rivalry across trade, diplomacy, geopolitical influence, and global standing. And if you have been searching Mexico versus South Africa, you already sense that something significant is happening. We are going to break it down with facts, real numbers, and zero filter. Stay until the end because the Pan-African implications of this story will genuinely change how you see Africa's future. Let us start with the foundation. Mexico and South Africa are both classified as upper-middle-income economies by the World Bank. Both are members of the G20. Both are considered regional powerhouses, Mexico dominating North and Central America, South Africa anchoring the entire sub-Saharan African bloc. For decades, international analysts placed Mexico firmly ahead. Mexico's GDP sits at approximately $1.3 trillion. South Africa stands at around $380 billion. On paper, Mexico looks like the clear winner. But here is where that surface-level comparison starts to crack. GDP alone does not tell the full story. South Africa's economy is deeply integrated into a continent of 1.4 billion people, a continent whose combined GDP is projected to reach $29 trillion by 2050. Mexico's economy, while large, is structurally dependent on the United States, with over 80% of its exports heading north of the border. South Africa, by contrast, is positioned at the center of the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AfCFTA, which when fully operational will be the largest free trade zone in human history by number of participating countries. 54 nations. 1.4 billion consumers. That is the playing field South Africa is building on. Historically, both nations carry the weight of colonial trauma and inequality. South Africa endured apartheid, one of the most systematically brutal racial regimes in modern history, only officially dismantling it in 1994. Mexico carries centuries of Spanish colonization, indigenous displacement, and economic subjugation. Both nations have massive wealth inequality. South Africa actually holds the record as the most unequal country in the world by the Gini coefficient, a sobering fact we must acknowledge honestly. But inequality is not destiny. It is a starting point. And this brings us to the current moment. Right now, South Africa is executing a foreign policy strategy that is turning heads globally. Under President Cyril Ramaphosa's administration, South Africa has refused to take simplistic geopolitical sides. It abstained on the UN resolution condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It hosted joint military exercises with Russia and China. It filed a genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice, a move that sent shockwaves through Western capitals and made South Africa the voice of the global South in a way no African nation has been in decades. Mexico, under President Claudia Sheinbaum, has taken a more cautious, domestically focused approach. While Mexico faces existential pressure from U.S. tariff threats, with President Trump threatening 25% tariffs on Mexican goods, South Africa is diversifying its partnerships east, south, and intra-Africa simultaneously. When people compare Mexico versus South Africa in geopolitical terms, this strategic independence is the defining variable. Like this video right now, help more Africans and Africa watchers see this story. Every like pushes this analysis to someone who needs to understand what is really happening on the global stage. Now let us talk about the key players shaping this comparison. On the South African side, you have Ramaphosa navigating a government of national unity, a complex coalition formed after the ANC lost its parliamentary majority in 2024 for the first time since 1994. This is not weakness. This is democratic maturity. The GNU includes the Democratic Alliance, the Inkatha Freedom Party, and smaller parties, forcing consensus building that actually mirrors how the European Union functions at a continental level. South Africa is essentially practicing continental governance at a national scale. On the economic player side, South Africa holds something Mexico simply does not. It is the gateway to Africa's resource wealth. South Africa controls significant reserves of platinum, chrome, manganese, and gold. As the world transitions to electric vehicles, platinum becomes critical. South Africa holds roughly 75% of the world's known platinum reserves. That is not a coincidence. That is leverage. Mexico has oil, avocados, and auto manufacturing all valuable. But its economic destiny is increasingly dictated by Washington, D.C. When the U.S. sneezes, Mexico catches a cold. South Africa, by building BRICS relationships, deepening AfCFTA ties, and positioning Johannesburg as Africa's financial capital, is constructing a diversified foundation that Mexico simply cannot replicate within its geographic and political constraints. Subscribe right now for honest, Pan-African analysis you will not find on CNN or BBC. We cover these stories with the depth and respect the African continent deserves. Let us get to the Pan-African implications because this is where it gets really powerful. South Africa's willingness to stand up at the ICJ, to host this analysis globally, to refuse Western pressure on its Russia policy, to champion the reform of the UN Security Council to include permanent African representation. This is not just South African politics. This is the African Union's agenda made visible on the world stage. When we place South Africa against Mexico in a broader framework, what emerges is a blueprint. Mexico is a powerful nation trapped in a unipolar dependency. South Africa is a medium-sized economy punching 3 weight classes above its GDP because it leverages collective African identity and multilateral diplomacy as force multipliers. That is the Pan-African model in action. That is what Kwame Nkrumah envisioned when he said Africa must unite or perish. And it is working. South Africa's trade with China exceeded $50 billion in recent years. Intra-African trade under AfCFTA grew by over 8% last year alone. Nigeria, Kenya, Ethiopia, Egypt all rising simultaneously. When you search global or world and you see Africa's geography suddenly mattering more in global conversations, it reflects a real shift in how the world understands African centrality. So what does all of this mean for Africa's future? Here is the bottom line that every African, every person of African descent, and every honest global citizen needs to understand. South Africa's trajectory versus Mexico's is not just about 2 countries on a map. It is proof of concept. It demonstrates that African nations that refuse dependency, build intra-African solidarity, leverage natural resources strategically, and project sovereign foreign policy can compete and win at the highest levels of global power. The challenges are real. Load shedding in South Africa remains a serious infrastructure crisis. Unemployment sits at over 32%, one of the highest rates in the world. Corruption continues to drain institutional capacity. These are not small problems. But the direction of travel, the strategic positioning, the diplomatic boldness, the continental integration points toward a South Africa and an Africa that will be undeniable in the coming decades. And for every person of African descent watching this anywhere in the world, in the diaspora, in the continent, in communities that have been told Africa is only a story of poverty and aid, this analysis is for you. The world is being rewritten. And Africa is holding the pen. If this breakdown gave you something real to think about, drop a comment below. Tell me, do you believe South Africa can fully close the GDP gap with Mexico by 2040? Or does Mexico's size give it an insurmountable advantage? I want to read every single response. The conversation in the comments of this channel is always the best on YouTube. Check out this next video right here where we go even deeper into how South Africa's ICJ case against Israel is reshaping Africa's global credibility and what it means for the continent's long-term foreign policy power. Africa is not waiting for permission anymore. The continent is moving, it is building, and the stories we tell here are the ones that matter. Thank you for watching. Stay Pan-African. Stay informed. And we will see you in the next one.